I just want to welcome everyone, and we're really excited to partner with our friends at UPR to bring this member event to you. We realize it's not the same as being together here in the museum, but we had a lot of discussions as a staff about ways that we can connect with you, and we're trying different things. So we love your feedback and your ideas as well. Um, and we want you to know that we are thinking about our members and those who visit the museum. And so to that end, there's a couple of things I want to show you that we've also been doing during this time. I wanted to just take 1 minute. I'm going to share my screen with you sorry, 1 second, there we go. If you haven't seen so the Chris Terry exhibition is installed in the museum. We have installed it, so and hopefully some of you have had time to visit the exhibition virtually, but if you haven't, I just want to show you on our exhibition page, there's more information about the exhibition and images right here. So as we have the discussion today, or if you want to revisit things, you can go here. But the virtual tour is here, and just give it a second to do its dramatic little zoom in there, and you can go in and see the exhibition in this way. This is also something new we're trying. We partnered with Youngblood Real Estate, who of course does virtual tours for homes around the Valley. And so they're allowing us to use their equipment and staff and being a sponsor to help us have virtual tours. So you can read the labels as well. But I just wanted you to be aware of that. I'm gonna go back just for 1 second, a couple of other things that we're doing right now. It's a really great student project with a pattern making class. There's also Art in Latin America online exhibitions. This pattern making class, this video is fantastic. They weren't able to exhibit their garments in the museum as originally planned, so this is what we came up with, and the students were really excited about that. We have added about 1,500, I think, a lot more artwork from our collection to our collection page. So there's a lot more to experience there as well. And then on our education page, we've been shifting our K through 12 content. We have online lesson plans here, and we're adding more material regularly. So there are things here if you have young kids or know people who are teachers or in K through 12, that's a resource they may want to check out as well. So just a few things that I wanted you to be aware of before that we're doing. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. I'm gonna just share my screen one more time here, is the sculpture walk. This is a great way to get outside, and I know Marilyn, who's on the call, she had her map one day. I saw her when we were doing it, but it's a great way to get out with your family. And we have an audio tour. There's a URL there on the map. So you can download this and print it and bring it with you. But that's a nice thing that we're trying to bring more attention to now since visitors can't come into the museum. So if there are other ideas for how we can bring the museum to you, please let us know. We're having a lot of discussions and ideas and trying things, but this is all new terrain for everyone. So we would appreciate your input. I'd like to now turn it over to our presenters today. We're of course featuring Chris Terry, Professor of Painting here at Utah State University. And he is joined by Tom Williams, Access Utah host at UPR, and Bolton Colburn. I hope you enjoy the conversation and know that we miss you, and we're glad to be able to spend a little time with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom.
Well, it's great to be with you. It's great to see some of your faces. This is unusual, especially on the radio. I wouldn't be doing this. By the way, in honor of everybody here, I'm wearing a tie for this conversation. but as far as you know, I'm dressed in a tuxedo every morning, right? But not usually. This is a great opportunity. We welcome our UPR members who are joining us. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And we will be having an Access Utah conversation that we recorded last week. We'll have that on the next couple of weeks. We'll let you know. So Bolton and Chris and I have done a dress rehearsal for this conversation right here. So I'm going to be leading a discussion, and we really hope that that you guys will chime in with your questions and comments. And I'll be looking at the chat function here in Zoom. So just you can get those questions in, right now or throughout the conversation. So I'll turn a little bit of time next over to Bolton Colburn, who is Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Noricos Harrison Museum of Art.
Great, Tom. I am going to introduce Chris and tell you a little bit about his background. Christopher Thomas Terry was born in Stamford, Connecticut in 1956. He attended the Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island, where he earned a BA in studio art in 1978. He continued his education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he earned his Master's of Fine Art degree in 1981. After moving back to Connecticut, he began exhibiting his paintings in and around New York area in 1982 and accepted a teaching position at the California State University Long Beach in 1984. That brought him to the West Coast, where he exhibited his work at galleries in both Los Angeles and San Francisco. In '88, he accepted a position at Utah State University and began teaching painting and drawing there. Professor Terry is the recipient of numerous awards as a painter, including the Utah Visual Artists Fellowship and a Westaff NEA Fellowship in Painting. He has twice been the recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship for Teaching and Research in Germany, and in 2000 was the visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome. He continues to exhibit his paintings in galleries in the United States and Germany. So, Tom?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to start with the pandemic. It's all pandemic all the time, it seems like right now. And of course, people would have been able to go physically to the museum and view Chris Terry's art, but a virtual tour. We have the slides up there at the NEMA site that you can view. So I'd like to start with this with Bolton. You had some interesting things to say about painting in the era of pandemic. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Right. I in the middle of a conversation, Tom, you and I and Chris were having the other day, it dawned on me, looking at Chris's work, that there are about interior scenes that all can conveyed a sense of isolation and loneliness. And the flip side of that is they're very meditative and comforting at the same time, and it just made me think that that's our current situation in terms of the pandemic, being at home and having those same feelings. So I thought it was timely that, actually timely, not that we forecasted this, to have this exhibition of Chris's work. And it's too bad that you can't see the exhibition in person, but you can see it virtually. And it's fitting for the current moment in our history with the pandemic.
Chris Terry, I wondered, you talk a little bit about art in time of social distancing. What can art do for us?
Oh, I've actually heard that question a lot, and I think that art can do a lot for us, and not just the visual arts, but all the arts can do a great deal for us. And I think they do those things for us at any time, whether we're in a time of great anxiety or a time of where life is relatively easy. Human beings have a need for the visual arts. And I think just about as far back as you want to go, they've been working with tools and materials and decorating them and thinking about ways to make artifacts special and personal. And this all basically comes back to the kind of thing that visual artists are doing today. Boy, I actually was interviewed recently by a student from the Utah Statesman, and she was asking me about this, and I said, well, you know, it might be that you should be interviewing a therapist to learn what it is that the arts are good for. I'm just a guy that makes the stuff, and I have to say that I make it because to a very large extent, I feel kind of compelled to make it. I really feel as though I don't have a lot of choice in the matter. But I certainly believe that human beings have always depended on the arts as a way of finding emotional stability and relating to the world around them, relating to other human beings. So it's certainly a huge and important part of who we are. But I'm not sure I can give you a whole lot more information than that.
Yeah. By the way, do you, in this time of social distancing and the pandemic sort of is the white noise of our lives now, does that change your process at all when you're making art? Does it change themes?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, one of the things that people might not know about painters, but painters in the world of the visual artists, we are the lonesome people. We really like to be alone. My colleague, John Neely, is in the audience, and he'll tell you that potters like to be together. They get together, they share kilns, they do all kinds of activities together. What painters really like to do is go in a room and close the door. And so I tell people all the time, I'm not sure what we're doing now is social distancing. Social distancing is what I feel I've been doing my entire life. What we're doing now is we're doing physical distancing. And that's what's really important, is that physical distance. So my life honestly has not changed a whole lot. I often spend large amounts of my day alone. I'm pretty comfortable with that. So I'm not really noticing a lot of what's going on, and I don't feel a lot of the anxiety that I hear people talking about from time to time.
So I'd like to jump into a little bit of your biography. So you went to high school in Connecticut?
Yeah.
So close to New York. So your field trips to art museums, you'd be going to some pretty good ones.
Yeah, we went to Museum of Modern Art. I remember a trip to the Guggenheim. We went to the Metropolitan, maybe more than once. We went to other places as well. I remember the Museum of Natural History in New York that we visited. So I really had exposure to the visual arts pretty early on, when I was still, I think, in junior high school.
When did you know you wanted to be an artist?
Oh, still not sure I want to be an artist. I'm being facetious, but in fact, I mean, I was attracted to the visual arts pretty early on when I was 13, 14, 15. I can remember the art students that I had. I remember my art teacher from kindergarten, Mr. Fapiano. Great guy. I really liked working with him, and I liked the stuff that we did. I had a very good friend growing up whose grandfather was a noted artist. And I always felt as though my friend was a good deal more talented than I was. I was often jealous of what he was able to do. And he seemed to do it without any particular effort. I think I had to work a little harder than he did, but the bottom line was that it wasn't a thing that interested him. He really didn't pursue it, and he didn't have that desire. And I had that need. So regardless of whether I had a great deal of talent or just a tiny little bit, I pursued it. And ultimately, one thing leads to another. It's just a string of really, I don't know, almost random kind of events that brings us to a certain point in our life. But I definitely knew early on that I was interested. Earlier
on, you used the word compelled.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you compelled to do art? Is that what's needed? Does that make it rich and satisfying?
Well, I really feel as though it's not an easy life to choose. If you're a student at Utah State University or any university, and you're picking how you're going to focus your activities and your attention, going into the arts can be pretty difficult. I wouldn't recommend that students do it unless they feel a real, very, very strong need. I want to say vocation, but that's kind of straying into the religious world. I don't know if that's really the right word. But certainly a compulsion, if you find that you cannot stop yourself from working and that you're drawn again and again and again to making things in paint or with a camera or with marble, clay, wire, then that's a good sign that you've got what it takes to pursue this. But I wouldn't recommend it to just anybody as an activity to pursue if you weren't really committed. I think you need to be committed to build a career in the arts.
Earlier, you told me you had a plan B right up through your terminal degree. Is that true?
Oh, I had plans B, C, D, F, G. Not so much while I was in school. I mean, one of the things that I tell students all the time is that when you're in school, your entire environment is focusing your attention on this activity of being an artist or being whatever it is that you want to be, being a historian, being a physicist. There's so much of a support system that surrounds you when you are in a degree program, when you're on campus. And when that is removed, when you graduate, that is a huge shock. And it can be a very, very difficult time for students when they take that degree, they leave campus, and suddenly they're surrounded by people where, I remember when I was in graduate school, if you mentioned to someone, what are you doing this Friday night? The answer would be, I'm going to go into the studio and work. That's what we did. And so that was a normal kind of reaction to have. If you are living outside of the university campus in normal society and people ask you what you're going to do on Friday night and you say, I'm going to go home and work, they think you're crazy. So you really lose a great deal when you leave campus. So my plans A, B, C, D, and E came up more after I left the university. I was a bartender for 4 years. I won't say that my career was going nowhere, but I was thinking about what the future was going to look like. When would I be able to leave that bartending job and make it as a painter? And so I was thinking about other possible careers, and ultimately the academic career is what finally turned up first. But I had a lot of clients. I worked in this great bar in Westport, and people were offering me jobs. It was I would get job offers from my clients, and they'd say, we could use somebody in our office to do X, Y, or Z. And there was Westport's a big marketing center. So I had a lot of marketing clients. Lots of different people, and graphic designers. And there's a huge group of illustrators that are around Westport as well. So all those fields were open to me, but ultimately academia got their bid in first.
Mhm. And we'll get into this just a little bit later. Since you're in academia, you had sabbaticals. And that's how this exhibit is organized.
Yeah.
I want to get to questions. So Katie asks, what painters do you consider to be influences on your work?
Oh boy. Well, certainly lots of different painters. I mean, I've been interested in a number over the years. We took, when we did the Access Utah interview, we talked about Giorgio Morandi, and I think that he is an artist that gave me the courage or the justification to focus on things that were not intrinsically important or dramatic. He's not a super well-known painter now. He has an excellent reputation, really one of the leading representational still life painters of modernism. But you don't hear a great deal about him now because his paintings are really very quiet and very unassuming. But he's a guy that I really admire. And basically, he spent his entire adult life looking at this very motley collection of dusty still life objects and figuring out new ways to look at them and discovering really subtle things that he could do with color and surface. And so I certainly admire him, but I like Pierre Bonnard. I like the American painters like Edward Hopper and Richard Dievenkorn. And certainly a really big influence on me was Wayne Thiebaud. I met him and went to a lecture that he did in Boston, in maybe 1976, 77. So any number of artists in that region.
Hmm. So Rachel says Wyeths. She wants you to comment on the Wyeths.
Oh, well, I'm certainly familiar with them. I think that probably they were a really early influence on me. Before, there were a couple of artists that I learned about when I was very young, and the Wyeth family would be one of those groups. But I also learned about Aaron Bowrod. He's a guy that you don't hear about much anymore, but he was he was an artist that had some presence in the non-art world, I guess I would say, in the same way that Norman Rockwell does. He's a painter, but also got a great deal of exposure as an illustrator on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And Aaron Bowrod was a guy that I learned about fairly early on. And certainly the kind of feeling that you get in those Wyeth paintings is similar to things that happen in my own work. I was certainly very drawn to those a lot of empty rooms that I remember, and windows where you would be looking at a comparison between interior and exterior space. I think of the Wyeth paintings as being maybe colder than I would want to be, but yeah, they were certainly an influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's a question from Philip. It says, your works have a lot of different kinds of light in them. What's your relationship or interest in light? This may be silly to ask, but do you have a favorite time of day? I think that's a great question.
Favorite time of day? No, I definitely like them all. I like all the times of day, and I see something really intriguing. Now I'm looking out my window right now behind the computer screen and seeing what the light is doing on the mountains that are to the east of us. And it's different than what I see when I look out the window at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., but it's really intriguing. But getting back to the question of my interest in light, I I related an anecdote when we were speaking on Wednesday about how when my son was very young, I remember him berating me because I was always making these paintings of things that he found kind of dull. He wanted me to make a painting of a jet airplane flying into a tanker truck and see what that explosion looked like. He couldn't understand why I was not interested in that kind of really dramatic subject matter. But for me, the challenge was always finding the least intrinsically interesting thing that I could find, and then finding a way to view it, a point of view, a way to frame it, to make it something that people might give some consideration to. And of course, the big way to make that happen is with light. You take this object, and if you can light it in the right way, then you can really wake up all kinds of intriguing features that are there that might be missed. So that's one of the things that's really important about light in my work.
Yeah. I wonder, Chris Terry, you've got some, you can hold some of your works up, can you?
Yeah, I can. I can share a screen, and I'll bring up a particular painting here. Where I really think that light issue is. Now, this is not the painting that I wanted to share. Why is that? I wonder. Let me try that again and see if we can get it to do it properly. No, it's coming back. It wants to share this particular painting. It doesn't want to share the other. It's not really a problem because I think that all of my paintings demonstrate this idea of the peculiarity of light. This is one of the landscape paintings that I did on the sabbatical when I was in Rhode Island. I haven't looked at the landscape seriously since I first moved to Utah, so almost 30 years without really making any kind of paintings that dealt with landscape. But when I was on sabbatical in Rhode Island, I was really drawn to the landscape. I was living on an island in the middle of Narragansett Bay, and everywhere I looked, something really phenomenal was happening. And so this particular view is of a place called Sheffield Cove, and the way that the light changed this view. I mean, just 5 minutes previous, the sun was shining and there were a couple of sailboats kind of scudding across the water, and it seemed like a very, very active and joyous kind of scene. And then very, very rapidly, the light changed and some clouds came in, and then the color of the water changed completely. And we can still see this little area here where light is poking through underneath the clouds. That was important to me. I wanted that to be there. But this is a great example of how much light is significant in the way that I'm looking at my subject matter.
I want to turn to, we do have another question from Matt. I'll get to that just very shortly. I want to turn back to Bolton Colburn. Generally, how would you characterize Chris Terry's work?
Chris Terry's work is the work of a lapsed Catholic. Every painting I've ever made is essentially an altar.
Oh.
And it took me about 4 years to figure this out. Somebody pointed it out to me. When I went to Rhode Island and I started working from the landscape, essentially the landscapes are the same paintings. There was a really significant technical problem that I had to overcome because of the depth of the space. That was really, really hard for me. And it took me 3 months at least of work before I got the first painting to really come together in the way I wanted. But basically, the landscape becomes a kind of an altar in the same way that the tables are. I really like so many of my paintings feature this fabric, a tablecloth that hangs over the table. And of course, one of the things that we do when we want to turn the process of feeding yourself, which is a necessary part of staying alive, but human beings have always made our meals into a ritual. Eating together is a hugely significant ritual. And one of the ways that we add some kind of drama to that event is through the tablecloth. My mother had a beautiful white linen tablecloth, and it only came out of the linen closet 2 times a year, Christmas and Easter. And so the tablecloth for me is a way of elevating the table and pushing it in the direction of the altar. So for me, that's just how I would characterize my work, is that I just keep making these altars, and I make images that are usually pretty quiet and meditative. Things sometimes get a little bit more dramatic. I do include diagonals every once in a while in a painting, but really I'm drawn to symmetry and that kind of ritualistic balance that we see in the altar.
Question for both. Yes, go ahead.
Follow up on that question you just asked. I mean, I would characterize Chris's work as being studies in perception. There's a whole group of artists in the 20th century that deal with perception in the same sort of way, but not many that get this far into it in terms of using subject matter that's representational. So there are some parallels in abstraction which are kind of interesting that apply to Chris's work as well. So.
Bolton, you organized, I don't know, I imagine you worked with Chris on this as well, but you organized this exhibit by sabbatical. Tell us about that, and what are the works different?
Yeah, well, we wanted to,
sabbatical.
The museum wanted to do an exhibition of Chris's work to wrap up his basic 30 years of presence here at the university. And so, I was doing a studio visit with him and kept on pulling out things that he was doing on sabbatical. And the things looked really interesting and not as worked out as many of the paintings that I knew of Chris up to that point were. So we began to get into a conversation about those sabbaticals, and he ended up having 4 sabbaticals, and sabbaticals are wonderful things for professors, especially those in the art world, and they certainly allow you to experiment and do some things that you wouldn't normally be able to during the course of your teaching. And so I saw that in Chris's work. I saw how a lot of the things that he started out doing during these sabbaticals weren't really all that worked out, and he was struggling. And I liked that sense of pushing himself to the boundaries and edges and playing with things that you wouldn't normally see him play with during the course of his work here at Utah State University.
Chris Terry, I want to talk about, just briefly, sabbatical. This gives me an excuse to read something that you wrote. It's very funny. So this it has to do with your 4th sabbatical. Quoting Chris Terry, "The demands of the muse are chronic. The demands of the university, on the other hand, tend to be acute. As any physician can tell you, in a head-to-head battle between the two, acute wins hands down. But the dream of the research university is that each faculty member will engage in scholarly activity as defined by their disciplines and earn distinction in their respective fields, while at the same time, they're also expected to transmit knowledge, extend their students' understanding and vision, develop their students' ability for critical and independent thinking, Oh, and can you also serve on the Faculty Dust Bunny Committee? So there's a lot of pressures. Sabbatical allows you to get away from that, right? What did you work differently on sabbatical?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing that Bolton recognized. Now, we were talking about doing some kind of an exhibition, and he came over to the studio, and we might easily have just chosen a bunch of paintings, and it might have spanned a certain period of time. But what was interesting about the idea that Bolton had is that it really tells a story in a way that if I had put this together, it wouldn't have had that quality, I'm sure. I just would have picked out some paintings that I liked. But what he picked out were paintings that were representative of these kind of transition points in my career. If I go to, let me share a painting like this. And so here's a painting that is representative of the very first sabbatical. And, I had been working at this point for easily 10 years, making these paintings that focused on interior spaces. They almost all involved some kind of still life subject matter. Originally, they had figures in them, and the figures left after a few years. And then I was focusing on paintings in oil that were typically, 3 by 5 feet, that kind of size. I wasn't unhappy making those paintings. I felt really, I wanted to make them, but I also could see that there was a kind of a rhythm there where I wanted to be able to break out and do things more spontaneously, not be stuck in a rhythm that forced me to go 8 weeks between beginning a piece and ending a piece. And that was pretty typical. So instead, I went on my very first sabbatical. I brought no art supplies with me. I thought, I have a pen, I have some paper, and we'll see what happens. And I was just going into the studio and drawing, making anywhere between 2 and 20 drawings every single day. Most of them were not particularly successful. I really couldn't figure out what to do with these materials. I started experimenting with some different black and white kinds of things. And the thing that was really the key for me is that I discovered that in Germany, you could buy a black that had a reddish undertone, as opposed to all the blacks I was familiar with up to that point that had a bluish undertone. So I started to make paintings like this one here. It was made in January, apparently, based on the title. I just titled them with the month and the order in which they were done, because there were just too many of them to put titles on. And this was really all about looking at the difference between warm and cool grays and warm and cool blacks. And this was really the very first painting that I did that I felt really, really positive about. And it was completely different, of course, than these large oil paintings that I had been working on for 10 or 12 years easily. And I spent the entire sabbatical. Once I got onto this, I just made, I must have made 120 of these paintings that were all done in gouache, ink, and some other water-based materials. I mixed in just about anything. Now, toward the end of that year, some colors did start to appear in these, but mostly it was a year that was entirely done in black and white. And that was another big change from the paintings that I've been working on, which I think most people would say were pretty colorful. So the sabbaticals were mostly opportunities for experimentation, for breaking the rhythm and getting away from maybe the rut that I was feeling myself go into. And when I got back from sabbatical, I was usually very excited about getting back into that rut again. I found the rut to be very comfortable and I enjoyed it.
I want to get back into questions from our audience here, but I want to first go to Bolton. So the exhibition materials say on sabbatical, traces periods where Chris Terry was stretching, creating, and testing pent-up ideas that he was finally able to exercise. Did you find that to be the case, Bolton?
Well, yeah, I think I can. Chris talked a little bit about a narrative between the sabbaticals that you can put together, and you can follow a certain progression from sabbatical to sabbatical, and they represent, you know, pretty different bodies of works and ways of thinking and problems that are being solved. So I definitely think it's intriguing to look at the work done between the sabbaticals, or not between the, comparing the work done at the sabbaticals is really an interesting exercise. And you know, Chris talked about a little bit about the first sabbatical and how he had discovered this warm black, which he was using in his work, and you know, that's sort of fascinating. And you look at those sketches and those paintings that he was doing at that period, and then move to the next sabbatical and see him all of a sudden take everything he learned from the first sabbatical and apply it to the second sabbatical and add color, and that changes the work dramatically. And then from the second sabbatical, you can move to the third sabbatical and look at how he's applying those lessons to interior paintings and dealing with, well, fluorescent lighting, for instance, versus natural lighting. And that's, you know, a really intriguing exercise. And I find the juxtaposition between the two paintings in the third sabbatical fascinating, because one's naturally lit from an exterior source, which is the sun, and the other one's lit by a fluorescent bulb. But seeing how he deals with that's really interesting. And then moving from that, and the implication in one of those paintings from the outside light that's coming in, that there is an outside, and going into the last sabbatical, which is the landscape. So interesting overall narrative that you can construct by looking at the work.
Just a reminder, you can go to the Norris Hills Harrison Museum of Art website, take a virtual tour, and also see the slides there. That's how you can experience this art. So let's get back to questions. By the way, I'm looking at the chat function on the Zoom here, so you can get your question in. This is from Susan, addressed to you, Professor Terry. You are personally very amusing. This humor is not necessarily visible in your paintings. Or am I missing something?
No, I don't think so. I don't see the arena of making paintings as a place where I want to be humorous. I certainly have known any number of artists that created humorous work, and they like to deal with that kind of subject matter. I haven't got any problem with that, but that's never a thing that has ever occurred to me. And, you know, I can remember being something of a humorist and entertainer going all the way back to when I was 3 and 4 years old. I can remember my neighbors paying me small amounts of money to perform La Cucaracha for them. So that's definitely a part of who I am, but it just never ever comes into the artwork.
Next question is from Ned and Gail. Do you photograph it first to capture the moment?
I've always used photography as a way of capturing bits and pieces of information. And of course, the light is really important to me, and you cannot maintain natural light in any consistent way. So if you want to preserve that light, photography is a really fabulous way to do it. I've always felt as though if I print those photographs out, that's really a deterrent. So I tend not to print them. I'm still paying to have images made into 35 millimeter slides that I look at in a little tiny slide viewer. And that is much better for me than looking at a printed photograph. So I use photography, but I prefer to look at slides. And every one of these paintings combines direct observation of the subject matter. It combines elements that come from stuff that I've gathered with photography. There is almost always some information that is just coming from my memory. And then there's stuff that you make up. So I really see 4 different kinds of information coming together in the paintings. And I might be kidding myself, but I think that each one of those 4 components adds something particular that is important to me.
Mm. Here's a question, a follow-up question from Katie. I had questions about this idea of printing the photograph out might be a deterrent. Katie asks, does the slide viewer keep the image from flattening in a way that a print might?
Well, that might be the case. I think that it's a very different experience to look into a viewer and than it is to look at a photograph. You're not aware of the surface of the image. So yeah, that's probably a good insight.
Here's another question from Katie. You mentioned spending time by yourself is something that you're comfortable with, as is probably the case for many painters. While the practice of painting requires you to be present, that term is sometimes associated with meditative. Your work for me, however, seems to embrace this and wants to create that same experience for the viewer by creating these quiet environments, a meditative space, using what you may call mundane objects, but in a beautiful, quiet environment. Are you trying to create that for the viewer?
Well, I think yes, definitely. It's an experience that I'm having, and even someone who is as antisocial as I am, I still, of course, have this human need to communicate who I am, what my experiences are with the world. And so the painting is the vehicle to do that with, that you could sit people down and you could try to tell them this thing, but they wouldn't want to listen. They'd be bored. You wouldn't really be successful if you were trying to communicate the information in that way. But by making a painting, I feel as though I can make that communication happen, and I can do it in a way that really engages people and gets my feelings, my thoughts across. So I would agree that that's definitely what I'm trying to do. One of the things I'm trying to do.
All right. Here's a question from Rachel. I hope I get this right, Rachel. Agaphachrome, did I say that correctly? Or Kodachrome?
Well, in the olden days, I believe that I was using Ektachrome a lot, but in fact, now I take all these photographs digitally, and there is some guy out there in the world. I connect with him on the internet. I don't know where the heck he is, but it's pretty obvious that he runs a one-man show, and I just upload digital images to him, and he creates slides for me and mails them to me. And I'm not sure what process he's using, but I definitely used Kodachrome was warmer, and the Ektachrome, as I remember, was cooler. But Ektachrome was what I was typically buying because it worked with the tungsten lighting when I would photograph my painting. So I just had it in the camera when I'd photograph other things as well.
Or Katie says, or ectoplasma. And then she says, that's a joke. So, okay, so we did get that. Thank you, Katie. I want to just have about 5 minutes left. I want to wrap this up around 1 o'clock. So definitely get your questions in on the chat here. I was very interested. We talked about this on our Access Utah program that we'll again, you can hear coming up in a couple of weeks. We recorded that. This idea of, well, let me get to this, reproduction culture. And Chris Terry, you talked about Velasquez painting that you know kind of picture in your mind as where it lies in the book, but then you go and see the painting itself, and there can be a great difference between the two, but that most of us consume it in reproductions.
Yes, and I have to say that my feelings about this are really pretty complicated, because the presence of really good reproductions in the world is a wonderful thing. I mean, if you go and look at books in Merrill Cazier Library that the university purchased in 1950, you'll find that they've got a really great monograph of Monet's work in black and white, which is the most bizarre, nonsensical thing to do that I can imagine. I mean, his work is all about color. When you photograph it in black and white, it basically turns into nothing at all. So it's great that we now have readily available good reproductions. And in some cases, a reproduction, I think about a painting like the Mona Lisa. On a good day, you can't get within 70 feet of it. It's under glass with all this reflection on it. So you can't see that painting if you go to the Louvre. It's not really worth it. There's no point, other than maybe you take a selfie of yourself in front of it just to show you were there, perhaps. But you can get really excellent reproductions of that painting that will actually allow you to experience it in ways that are not possible now. So reproductions can be a really, really good thing. But what we have to remember is that reproductions are not the real thing, and that most of the time we're missing a great deal. So I'm still a big believer in encouraging people to experience the real thing. During my time at Utah State University, I took hundreds of students on trips to places like Los Angeles and San Francisco in particular. We did a lot of trips to San Francisco, and of course to Berlin and Antwerp and Dusseldorf and places like that when I did my study abroad trips, always with the idea that what they needed was the ability to see real objects of art in person. Very long
Bolton,
answer.
No, that was great. Thank you. I'm interested in Bolton's ideas, this idea of reproduction, you know, versus the actual. I mean, there's great advantages to reproduction because not all of us can get to the Louvre, right? But what are your experience? What you'd say about this?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that, you know, the digital age is a great moment for humanity overall, and that we are, as a species, becoming more and more visually literate as a result of it. That said, I don't think as Chris mentioned, I don't think there's ever going to be a substitute for seeing something in person. But I think the fact that, you know, masses of people can experience something digitally now will lead them back to the original as well. So that's an important connection. But you know, as Chris was talking, I also just thought of something that I experience on a daily basis. We acquire works of art for the museum, and often we acquire them at auction, and sometimes we don't get to see them in person. And I'm always surprised when they show up at the museum and I unpack them and look at them, because they're inevitably never exactly like I had imagined them being from looking at them digitally. So I'm always surprised.
Well, let's move toward wrapping up here. This is a great question to do that on. Terry asks, Chris, now that you're getting ready to retire, she has that in quotes. What is your next adventure?
Well, I think retire in quotes is very appropriate because I really think of it as getting to work. I'm leaving academia. I won't be serving on that Dust Bunny committee anymore, and I'm very pleased about that. I have a studio space that I own in Rhode Island. It's waiting for me, and I'm really excited about moving there. I'm going to do some renovation, but I'm hoping to get to work in it pretty much within the first 4 to 6 weeks. And my plan is to be a full-time artist for really the very first time in my entire life. And I've always had other things that I was doing, and I'm looking forward to being able to really focus and work every day in the studio.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Bolton Colburn, as we wrap up here, any thing you'd like to say at the end here?
Chris said something the other day which I thought was kind of interesting, and he said, he identifies with the ocean more than he does with the mountains. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that too, Chris, but I found that kind of an interesting comment, and wondering how your paintings are going to change as a result of not being in the mountains, but being by the ocean.
Well, in some ways, I guess I don't. I mean, they'll change in an obvious way, but I think that at their core, they probably won't change because I don't think I'll change. And I've really, in a very real way, I feel as though I've only got the one painting, and I just keep making it over and over again. There are variations in the subject matter, in the size, in the materials, but fundamentally, I'm really fascinated by surfaces and the way that things happen on the surface. So when I look at the landscape, I did a series of paintings of the Utah landscape, and they're all about the way the earth undulates and folds, and ultimately it's the very same thing as what happens with those tablecloths. It just is not, it's not all that different. And if I'm looking at the landscape and it's more of a marine landscape, then again, I'm interested in surfaces and how the light is animating those surfaces and altering them and changing my perception of them. So I really think that I've got these key obsessions that just keep coming back again and again and again, regardless of the environment, regardless of the subject matter. So there'll be superficial changes, but probably not any fundamental changes.
Mm-hmm. So Chris Terry, anything you'd like to add at the end here?
Well, I'd like to add that I really appreciate everything that the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum has done to mitigate the fact that we haven't been able to hold this exhibition in a physical space and have people come. And at one point, it really looked as though there really wasn't even any point maybe in installing the show. And I think the creativity of the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum staff and Bolton and Katie getting their heads together to think about ways that they could present this work creatively and create events like this have really made it a big success. And I think it's quite possible that more people will see the show in this way than would have seen it if we had just opened it up in the museum and kind of waited for people to walk in. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everything the museum has done. And I appreciate your help with this, Tom. You've done a really fabulous job.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bolton Colburn, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks, Chris.
My pleasure.
And Chris Terry, congratulations on your retirement, in quotes. And the exhibit, Chris Terry on Sabbatical, is at the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art. And you can take a virtual tour. You can see the slides as well at the NEMA website. So that's all available for you. And thanks everybody for your great questions and for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And